Friends, welcome back to another Pints with Jack Skype session, where each week my good and dear friend David and I dive into a specific topic from our podcast. I almost said dive into a specific podcast. And these are unscripted. They're not very planned, which makes them fun, very different from the podcast. David's like, yeah, fun, unplanned. These are more Matt style. I assume David is wise enough to always be able to handle it. And so far, you've proved me right, David. But before we get in...
Your flattery is absolutely working.
Before we get in, let's cheers. Or you can just start drinking. You know, go for it.
Cheers.
Cheers. I am doing this thing in preparation for Easter, which is why I do not have alcohol. But there will be times I'm allowed one thing back each week. So there will be a week where I ask for alcohol back, and I'll probably have it.
Whereas I will have the Great Fast, Lent, starting fairly soon, when I basically have to give up everything fun. So I'm enjoying God's good creations here and now.
I like I said that I give up everything fun. It's all...
To be fair, there's not a whole lot left.
It's all to make you
holy. I don't know how vegans smile.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, without further ado. So this week in the book that we're reading, Till We Have Faces, if someone's just watching this, there are two main characters, and one of the main characters was given a grace, pretty much a gift, where she's been wrestling with a question of knowing if something is true or not, and the gods revealed something to her that really suggested one way. And she said some things that caught my attention that I want us to expand upon here. So I'm going to bring her in right now and what she said. As she received the grace, she goes, "What would it do for me for my blasphemies and unbelievings? I never doubted that I must now I never doubted that I must now cross the river or try to cross it, even if it should drown me. I must lie on the steps at the great gate of that house and make my petition. I must ask forgiveness of Psyche as well as of the God." So she receives this grace, which suggests to her that Psyche has been right and the gods are real and the gods are good. And then her first thought is she must ask for forgiveness. And then some doubt creeped in, which we can also expand on here a little bit. So she receives a grace. Her first thought is to ask for forgiveness, but then rejects it, as we see later on in the chapter. And this spurred thoughts for me because Psyche, we see this difference where Psyche responds to the grace in a proper way, and she doesn't respond to the grace properly. And this made me think of a practice, a spiritual practice that I find really helpful in my own life. And it's a very new thing for me. It's very old tradition, but it's a new thing that I've adopted. And I wanted us to talk about that here. It's the Examen of Conscience. And so David's like, this is classic Matt.
I love the way that you are purposely making some mistakes so people know that this isn't edited.
That's exactly right. Thanks for helping me out there.
It's very thoughtful of you.
Yes. But she wasn't able to see. She was not able to actually receive the grace. And the Examen of Conscience, yes, I said that right. Now you have me second guessing myself, is a great practice for reflecting on the day. And I will start by us introducing the examen itself. So it's a practice where there's 5 steps to it, and it's really well done at the end of the day, where you first begin by becoming aware of God's presence, then review the day with gratitude. Look at the graces and the joys and the gifts that God put into your life. Then pay attention to your emotions as you're reviewing your day. And some of these will be positive and some will be negative. You might feel anger. You might have even seen parts where you had resentment. And you might see ways that you fell short of your day. And you might see ways that you sinned. Then, fourth, choose a feature of the day. What sticks out to you? And maybe pray from it. Maybe it's a really beautiful thing. So you're praying to God in gratitude. Maybe it's a way that you're like, whoa, I really screwed up here. I did not do what I needed to do. And you pray for help and grace to do better. And then look toward tomorrow. The reason I'm bringing all this up, how it connects to that, is when you bring this practice into your life, you start to be able to be more receptive to the graces that God bestows upon you. We miss them all the time. Orwell, the person who received the grace in this book, clearly missed it and rejected it. Her fears and her doubts came in. And it just made me think of the importance in our own lives of making sure we're constantly open to seeing, perceiving, and receiving God's graces. And so, David, I want to get some of your thoughts on this now. This is one of my more longer monologue rambles to start one of these. So what is the examen to you? Is it something you've done? And what are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's part of my spirituality. It's nowhere near as formal as that. I try and make it the last thing I do as I'm getting into bed, looking over the day. And I just put it a little bit more simply: what went great, what went terribly, what do I need to work on? But I think it can be so powerful in terms of changing the trajectory of our lives, because as creatures, we are very easily tricked into simply just going with the flow, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And we then wake up and suddenly realize, wait, how did my life happen?
Good word. I like that.
Because we haven't really been present, and we haven't been trying to direct it.
Or intentional. I like that too.
If you read any books on financial planning or time management, they say, plan your finances, plan your time, because if you don't plan them, somebody else will.
Yep.
And they'll just be the forces around you that will just buffet you one way or the other. And so having a regular practice of taking stock of the day allows you to actually reflect on your life and see the direction that it's going, the patterns in your own behavior. If you find yourself constantly noting that you lose your temper, that's probably something that you need to work on. And it also helps foster an attitude of gratitude towards all the good things that God gives you. And I would say the real benefit of that is you start being more attentive, more aware of God's hand in your life. You see his fingerprints everywhere, and you start recognizing good things that happen as graces, which ultimately have to come from him, the giver of every good and perfect gift.
There's a very strong, I love how you use the word presence. You become very present to God's graces. There's an intentionality to it. It is very easy to sleepwalk through our spiritual journey, to go through the motions, and to never take a step back and review all the ways that God is providing his graces. And it's even powerful because in our sufferings, we can see a lot of God's graces. I love the term redemptive suffering. And most often when you're in suffering, you're feeling emotions that are negative, and it's very hard to see God in it. And so when you take that step back, you review and you ask yourself, God, what can I see in this? How are you working in this? Like, that's a good time to be able to do that. And so it's a really beautiful practice for that. And connecting it. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and on the flip side of that, it helps you to know yourself. I mean, the character of Orwell in Till We Have Faces, over the course of the book, we haven't finished it yet, and I haven't read it, so I don't know quite how this ends, but you keep getting hints, the fact that she doesn't really know herself as well as she might. Every now and again you get flashes of insight, but other times she seems to be completely blind to how destructive her love for her sister Psyche is becoming. And if she had the opportunity, if she did the examen, even if she's asleep on the mountain, she might look back and start noticing the patterns of her behavior and the patterns of her thinking, and realizing that this is heading in a trajectory that is going to take her to a very dark place.
And I got to be careful not to open up a new path here, so I'll just make a minor comment. And this will definitely be another video down the road. But I'm reading a book on knowing yourself. And it talks about when you are more self-aware, when you know yourself, and it actually talks about the examen, you can begin to know God better. Because when you see, you are made in his image, you are a creature in his image. And when you see yourself, you see your flaws, you also start to allow God's love in. And in that way, as you let his love in, you start to get to know him better as a loving God. And so the examen is very helpful for your relationship with God. And I wanted to bring it up because the question I constantly ask myself, people who listen to the podcast will know this. In the book, there's two separate characters, and one character is going down the right path, who perceives God's goodness, feels this longing for the divine, and now is entering into communion with the divine and finding a joy from that. And then there's this other character who's going the complete opposite way, Orwell, the one we've more been talking about here. And I always ask myself, how do you get to be more like, well, it'd be this way, the good one? And the Examen, I think, is a really good practice for all of the reasons you said: the self-awareness, the intentionality, the review, the openness to being able to receive God's graces, the be able to see your own sins, to be able to improve on them. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this. And so I appreciate you sharing your insights on it. And I hope listeners are encouraged by this. You don't need to, I like how you said, you don't need to follow a formal structure. If you just spend 10 minutes reviewing your day in gratitude and seeing God's goodness and his graces and the way you responded or failed to respond to them, that alone is enough. I mean, I can't tell you how much that will change your spiritual journey.
I would say just some basic questions to ask yourself is, where did I see the goodness of God today? And where did I fail to love God with my whole heart, soul, body, mind, and my neighbor as myself? To ask those 2-3 questions, that would be a good practice to begin. And if you find it helpful, then you can dig into some of the more structured examens that are out there. You'll be able to Google them.
I've got nothing to add past that. That is really good. I like that. Thank you for wrapping that up for us, David. And thank you for joining me. And friends, thank you for joining us with the Skype Sessions. So we'll see you guys next week when we go further up
and further in. Cheers.
Cheers.